Today on We Tell the Story, a magnificent essay written by Eduardo Galeano, The Open Veins of Latin America. The Open Veins of Latin America is a captivating and provocative literary work that delves into the tumultuous history of our peoples. Written by the renowned Uruguayan author Eduardo Galeano and published in 1971, the book offers a fascinating narrative of the exploitation and economic inequality that have plagued the region for centuries. When Christopher Columbus set out to cross the vast oceans, the Americas not only lacked a name, the Norwegians didn't know they had discovered it long before. And Columbus himself died after his voyages, still convinced that he had reached Asia from behind. The gleam of the New World's treasures dazzled the European conquistadors who came to serve God and His Majesty and also to get rich. Amerigo Vespucci, an explorer of the Brazilian coastline at the dawn of the 16th century, would tell Lorenzo de Medici, "The trees are of such beauty and such gentleness that we felt we were in the earthly paradise." There was everything among the indigenous peoples of the Americas: astronomers and cannibals, engineers and Stone Age savages. But none of the native cultures knew iron, glass, or gunpowder, nor did they use the wheel. The indigenous peoples were initially defeated by astonishment. Emperor Moctezuma received the first news in his palace. Great fright was caused by hearing how the cannon exploded, how the noise boomed, and how they fainted. One's ears are stunned. The men of America were free and owned the land, but the European conquistadors took possession of both men and land. The conquest was not only a physical invasion, but also a cultural one. Europeans imposed their language, religion, and customs on the indigenous peoples, eradicating their rich heritage. They say that even the horseshoes were made of silver during the city of Potosi's boom period. The altars of the church and the wings of the cherubims in processions were made of silver. In 1658, for the celebration of Corpus Christi, the city's streets were unpaved and completely covered with silver bars from the main church to the Recoletos church. In Potosi, silver built temples and palaces, monasteries and taverns. It gave rise to tragedy and revelry, spilled blood and wine, ignited greed and unleashed squandering. The indigenous peoples were thrown into the mine shafts to poisoning and fire. The indigenous peoples were bought and sold, sleeping outdoors. Mothers killed their children to save them from the torment of the mita. The arrival of the Europeans also brought diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, to which the indigenous peoples had no immunity. These diseases spread rapidly and had a devastating impact on the indigenous population. The conquistadors' most efficient ally was not the cannon, it was the plague. The indigenous population of the Americas was reduced by half within a century of Columbus's arrival, a loss from which it has never recovered. Meanwhile, Juan Ginés de Sepúlveda, the humanist, argued that the indigenous peoples deserved the treatment they received because their sins and idolatries constituted an offense against God. Comte de Buffon claimed that indigenous people were frigid and weak animals without any activity of the soul.
Journalist and writer Eduardo Galeano was born in Montevideo, Uruguay. He began his career at just 14 years old with the socialist newspaper El Sol, where he published political cartoons and drawings. He later became editor of the weekly magazine Marcha and the daily newspaper Época. In 1973, after being imprisoned in Uruguay by the military dictatorship, he went into exile in Argentina, where he founded the magazine Crisis. He returned to his home country in 1985. Eduardo Galeano published numerous books including Los Días Siguientes, Su Majestad el Fútbol, Las Venas Abiertas de América Latina, Vagamundo, Memoria del Fuego, and El Libro de los Abrazos. With a perceptive, incisive, and intelligent style, his work, translated into more than 20 languages, is a perpetual and controversial interpretation of Latin American reality, considered by many to be an X-ray of the continent.
In 1781, Tupac Amaru laid siege to Cusco. This mestizo chieftain, a direct descendant of the Inca emperors, led the largest and most significant messianic and revolutionary movement. He had sentenced the royal magistrate Antonio Juan de Arriaga to the gallows and ordered the prohibition of the Potosí Mita. Tupac Amaru issued a new edict decreeing the freedom of slaves. Victories and defeats followed. Finally, betrayed and captured by one of his own leaders, Tupac Amaru was handed over and subjected to torture along with his wife, his children, and his main supporters. His tongue was cut out, his arms and legs were tied to 4 horses to quarter him, but the body did not split. He was beheaded at the foot of the gallows. It was recommended that all his descendants be extinguished up to the 4th degree. Gold and silver were not the only things that fueled the colonizing greed. Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro disintegrated the Aztec and Inca empires. In Brazil, the Portuguese planted sugarcane, and with the slave labor of the indigenous peoples, they became the world's leading exporters. They brought Africans to the Antilles to be exploited. They burned and poisoned the land wherever they went. The populations where they found resources became a prey to sacrifice. The indigenous peoples were not only dispossessed of their lands, but they also became instruments of their own destruction. The English, French, Portuguese, and Spanish exploited natural resources and human labor. This didn't end with the colonial period. The pattern of exploitation and economic dependency continued into the modern era. Foreign corporations and governments took the place of the colonial powers, extracting the region's wealth and leaving little in the name of local economic development. Latin America's rich natural resources continued to flow toward the developed world, perpetuating a cycle of poverty and underdevelopment in the region. The wealth of the land impoverishes the people who live in it. After emancipation, the landowners and merchants increased their fortunes while the poverty of the popular masses spread. The bourgeoisie of these lands was born simple and monopolized political power. They had no interest in promoting the rise of manufacturing. Simón Bolívar issued the Trujillo Decree in 1824, but its legal provisions did not harm the Peruvian oligarchy at all. They remained intact, and the indigenous peoples continued to be exploited as always. The latifundio integrates as a constellation of power. It multiplies the hungry, but not the bred. Latin America's agricultural production today is lower than it was on the eve of World War II. The structure of the countryside is a waste of land, and the modern agricultural techniques degrade the soil through the use of fertilizers and herbicides. Paraguay stood as an exception in Latin America, the only nation that foreign capital had not deformed. It had defeated the oligarchy, experiencing autonomous and sustained economic development. The Paraguayan peasant masses crushed the oligarchy and had won internal peace by maintaining a strict cordon with the old viceroyalty. Paraguay had a telegraph line, a railway, and a good number of factories for construction materials, textiles, canvas, ponchos, paper and ink, pottery, and gunpowder. In the arsenal of Asunción, they produced bronze cannons, howitzers, and bullets of all calibers. The result of this process was the War of the Triple Alliance. The English minister in Buenos Aires, Edward Thornton, participated considerably in the preparations of the war. On the eve of the outbreak, he took part as a government advisor in the meetings of the Argentine cabinet, sitting next to President Bartolomé Mitre. Under his watchful eye, the plot of provocations and deceptions was hatched that culminated in the Argentine-Brazilian agreement and sealed the fate of Paraguay, defeated in a war where Uruguay also joined against it to maintain the integrity of its territory. The astronauts had imprinted the first human footprints on the moon's surface in July 1969. From this marvelous observation platform, we will be able to examine all the Earth's riches, the unknown oil fields, the copper and zinc mines. That's what the Americans believed. Oil remains the main fuel of our times. North Americans import a seventh of the oil they consume. To kill the Vietnamese, they need bullets, and bullets need copper. The needs for raw materials are constantly increasing as the population expands and the standard of living rises. The largest copper reserve is in Chile, where in the 1970s, assassinations were plotted and dictatorships were promoted that arbitrarily murdered their own peoples. The independence of Latin America, proclaimed in the 19th century, was a political fiction that concealed new forms of economic dependency. Foreign corporations and governments took the place of the colonial powers, extracting the region's wealth and leaving little in the name of local economic development. The struggle for control of resources has frequently led to conflicts and coups. The history of Latin America is a history of interrupted revolutions and aborted dreams. Foreign powers often intervene to protect their interests, further destabilizing the region's political landscape. But it is the technocrats who demand a purse or the life with more efficiency than the Marines. By taking away many more dollars than they bring in, companies contribute to exacerbating the region's chronic hunger for foreign currency. Countries benefiting from loans decapitalize instead of capitalize. Once the wheat is separated from the chaff, one concludes that barely 38% of the nominal aid can be considered real aid. Loans offer indications as precise as a thermometer to evaluate the general business climate of each country and help clear the political clouds or revolutionary storms from the transparent sky of millionaires. More than half of the loans Latin America receives come with prior green light from the IMF, from private and official United States agencies. International banks also make up a significant percentage. For North American imperialism to reign in Latin America today, it was necessary that yesterday the British Empire contributed to dividing us for the same ends. An archipelago of countries, disconnected from each other, was born as a consequence of the frustration of our national unity. While North America grew and developed inward, within its borders, in the South, we developed outward, our unity exploding into pieces like a grenade. The current integration process doesn't reconnect us with our origin, nor bring us closer to our goals. The prophecy that the United States seemed destined by Providence to plague America with miseries in the name of freedom was accurate. We are not witnessing here the savage infancy of capitalism, but its bloody decrepitude. Underdevelopment is not a stage of development, it is its consequence. The underdevelopment of Latin America comes from foreign development and continues to feed it. Impotent in its function of international servitude, moribund since it was born, the system has feet of clay. It presents itself as destiny and would like to be confused with eternity.
All memory is subversive because it is different, as is every future project. The zombie is forced to eat without salt. Salt, being dangerous, could wake it up. The system finds its paradigm in the immutable society of ants. That's why it gets along so poorly with the history of men, because of how much it changes, and because in the history of men, Every act of destruction finds its answer, sooner or later, in an act of creation. And this was the fascinating historical essay by Eduardo Galeano. Do you think Latin America is truly a population exploited by foreign powers? Do you believe that the history of peoples is a competition? Would Latin American countries have a better future if they govern themselves together? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. If you want to support this video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And you know you can buy my book, The Spectacle of Life, with the details in the description. Thanks for watching the video. A hug, and until next time.